I walked barefoot through the hallway, the hardwood floor cool under my feet despite the warm afternoon air lingering in the house. The windows were slightly ajar, letting in the scent of the garden and the occasional rustle of leaves. My husband had left for his meeting an hour ago. As always, he had kissed my temple in passing, distracted, already half thinking about the stock numbers he would discuss. On the kitchen table lay his tablet, still blinking with unread messages, and beside it a coffee cup with a faint imprint of his lips. It was all so perfectly in order. Too perfectly. The silence wrapped around me like a warm shawl. And yet, beneath that stillness, something shifted. A quiet disruption. It started days ago, when he arrived. My husband's son from his first marriage. A temporary guest, he said. A few weeks at most, until he settled back into life here after years abroad. I didn't think much of it then. I'd met him before, fleetingly, at birthdays and holidays. Polite, composed, detached. But now he was here, living under our roof. And his presence. It didn't simply fill space. It disturbed it. I had gone to the laundry room to retrieve a blouse when I noticed the ajar door of the spare bedroom he now used. I hadn't meant to look. I told myself that more than once in the moments that followed. But the door was cracked open just enough for my gaze to slip inside. He stood there, back turned, towel wrapped low on his hips, water still dripping from his hair. There was music playing softly from his phone on the dresser. Something rhythmic, with a beat that made me oddly aware of the pulse in my own neck. He ran a hand through his wet hair and then turned. Slowly, his eyes met mine. The moment was a breath. No more. But in that breath, something opened. Something unspoken passed between us, heavier than the silence. I stepped back before he could say anything, closed the door gently, and pressed my hand to my chest. Not from fear, from something far more dangerous. My heart was racing. My skin prickled, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. It was recognition. Of what, I didn't know. But it was real. That evening, we sat at the table like a portrait of domestic harmony. My husband discussed something about the garden renovation. He scrolled through his phone while eating. Across the table, the guest, his son, sat in a loose shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes occasionally flicking toward me. Not boldly, but attentively. As if he saw through the silence I wore like a mask. I found myself choosing a dress with thinner straps the next morning. A silk wrap I hadn't worn in over a year. It wasn't for anyone in particular, I told myself. It was just warm, but I knew better. I noticed how the fabric skimmed my skin, how my collarbone caught the light. I passed by the hallway mirror and paused longer than necessary. He was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, leaning against the counter, drinking coffee from one of the mugs I'd chosen years ago. His eyes found mine, and then traveled slowly down. Not crude, not obvious, but enough to make the heat rise in my neck. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the other end of the counter. For a moment, the silence stretched like a taut string between us. Then he spoke. "You look different today." I turned my head slightly, keeping my voice level. "Different how?" "Not sure," he said, sipping. "Maybe more like yourself." His words landed in my chest with a quiet, unfamiliar weight. Later, I stood under the shower, letting the water run over my body while replaying everything in my head. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. As if he were observing something I'd forgotten was visible. As if he were waiting for me to realize it too. That night, I lay beside my husband, who had fallen asleep within minutes. I watched the ceiling fan spin lazily above us. I turned my head toward the window, where a soft orange glow from the guesthouse lights flickered through the trees. And I wondered, why did it feel like that brief moment in the hallway had stirred something that would never settle back into silence again? I woke earlier than usual. The sky outside the window still carried that muted lavender tint of early morning, the kind that makes everything feel suspended, uncertain. I wrapped a robe around myself and headed downstairs, craving the solitude of the kitchen before the day fully woke up. But when I turned the corner, he was already there. He stood barefoot on the cool tiles, wearing a simple t-shirt and gray sweatpants, hair still tousled. The smell of coffee hung in the air, warm and grounding. He didn't flinch when he saw me, just offered a faint smile as he leaned against the counter, one hand cradling his mug. "I didn't expect anyone else up this early," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I couldn't sleep," he replied. Jet lag's still doing its thing. There was something almost intimate in the way he said it. Not just the words, but the quiet honesty of them. I moved slowly to the cupboard, reaching for a mug. I was aware of how the silk of my robe slid against my skin, how the hem brushed just above my knees. I told myself it didn't matter, that I dressed this way in the mornings all the time. But I knew better. He poured the coffee before I asked, sliding the mug toward me across the counter. Our fingers didn't touch, but they could have. And the almost of it was electric. "Thanks," I said. He gestured to the window. "You can barely see the garden in this light, but it still smells like summer." "It always does in August," I said, sipping. "Even when it's over, it lingers." He looked at me then. Not the casual glance of someone making conversation, but a sustained, searching look that made my chest tighten. I looked away first, focusing on a spot on the countertop. A hairline crack in the marble that had always annoyed me suddenly became fascinating. "I meant what I said yesterday," he said. I kept my eyes on the counter. "About what?" "You seem different. I wasn't trying to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I lied. He paused, letting the silence swell between us. And then, as I turned toward the sink, I felt it. His hand brushing against my forearm. Gentle. Deliberate. I should have stepped back. Should have broken the contact. But I didn't. My breath caught, held hostage for a second too long. And when I looked at him again, he leaned in. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't rushed. It was inevitable. His lips touched mine with a slowness that made the room disappear. There was no sound, no movement, only the pull of skin meeting skin, of breath shifting against breath. My hand lifted involuntarily, resting against his chest. The fabric of his t-shirt was soft and warm, and I felt the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath it. Then I broke away. Not with a slap, not with anger. Just distance. A few steps back. The coffee cup still steamed on the counter, untouched. "I can't," I said, my voice low and uneven. "I know," he replied. I didn't wait for more. I turned and walked away, heart hammering, mouth dry, legs too light to trust. At the top of the stairs, I paused. My fingers trembled as I gripped the railing. But what disturbed me most wasn't the kiss itself. It was that I didn't feel guilt. I felt awake. The following day, my husband asked me to drive his son to a property outside the city. Some old family land they were thinking of renovating. "It's a good chance for you two to talk," he said, like he was offering a peace treaty I hadn't asked for. I said yes too quickly. My voice betrayed nothing, but my chest tightened the moment I agreed. We left just after noon. The sun was sharp, the car too warm at first. He adjusted the air conditioning without speaking. For the first 15 minutes, the only sound was the occasional clicking of the turn signal and the low hum of the road beneath us. He didn't bring up the kiss. Neither did I. But the silence felt like something that had weight, like a third passenger seated between us. He eventually reached for the radio and settled on an old blues station. The guitar strings and raw voices filled the space between us. I kept my eyes on the road. "Do you always drive like this?" he asked finally. "Like what?" "Like you're trying not to feel anything." I tightened my grip on the wheel. "I'm just focused." "On what? Not being here?" I glanced at him. His tone wasn't mocking. It was curious, and worse, accurate. "I'm just driving," I said, quieter now. He turned toward the window, exhaling slowly. The landscape shifted outside, flat fields giving way to scattered trees, power lines curving with the road. Somewhere past the halfway point, I pulled into a rest area near a lake. I needed air, maybe distance, maybe just silence that wasn't inside a moving vehicle. The lake shimmered under the sunlight, framed by dry grass and uneven ground. I got out, walked a few steps to the edge, wrapped my arms around myself. He joined me a minute later, hands in his pockets. "You didn't have to stop," he said. "I know." We stood there for a while. I watched the water. He watched me. "I wasn't playing games that morning," he said finally. "I didn't plan it. I'm not trying to make your life harder." "You already did." "I'm not sorry." I turned to him then, searching for something cruel to say, something final. But what came out instead was quieter. "You shouldn't be." He took a step closer. My body noticed before I did. A faint buzz across my skin. I inhaled sharply and turned back to the lake. "You said I seemed different," I said. "I've felt invisible." For years, he didn't respond right away. Then, softly, "You're not invisible to me." That sentence sat between us, solid and irreparable. We returned to the car without another word. The music stayed off. I kept the window slightly down, letting the wind tangle in my hair. His arm rested near mine on the console, and every time our sleeves brushed, my thoughts blurred. When we pulled into the driveway 2 hours later, my husband was watering the plants, waving like nothing in the world had changed. But inside the car, something had. And I wasn't ready to pretend otherwise. That evening, I couldn't decide what to wear. Not because we had plans. There was nothing scheduled beyond dinner at home. The usual silence broken only by clinking cutlery and scattered updates from my husband about the renovation project. But because I felt unsettled in my own skin, restless, like I was wearing the wrong version of myself, I stood in front of the wardrobe longer than usual. My fingers ran over a black slip dress I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't particularly revealing, but the fabric clung where it needed to and whispered around the knees like smoke. I put it on without fully understanding why. Maybe to test myself. Maybe to see if I could still feel seen. When I walked downstairs, my husband was already seated at the table, scrolling through his tablet. He glanced up only once. "Going somewhere?" he asked. Number just felt like changing. "Looks nice," he said, eyes back on the screen. It wasn't unkind. It just lacked weight. A compliment dropped out of habit, like offering a napkin. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat across from him. We talked about the forecast, his colleague's new promotion, a friend's daughter's engagement. My responses were automatic. Nods, half smiles. The kind that take effort when your mind is nowhere near the room. Later, I went back upstairs, the dress still clinging softly to my body. I stepped into the walk-in closet and reached for a loose cardigan, but paused. There was movement in the hallway. Quiet, unhurried footsteps. The sound stopped near the open door of the closet. He was there, standing just beyond the threshold. I met his gaze through the mirror. Neither of us moved. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged. His eyes didn't lower. They held mine, steady and deliberate. I should have said something. Should have asked what he wanted or told him to go. But my mouth stayed closed. I turned slightly, revealing more of myself in the reflection. Just enough to register the shape of his breath, the way his hand flexed by his side. "I was looking for a book," he said finally. "They're downstairs." "I know." Still, he didn't leave. My heart beat too loudly in the silence. I reached for the cardigan but didn't put it on. Instead, I walked past him, close enough to smell his cologne. Faint, unfamiliar, but now embedded in memory. He stepped aside but didn't look away. And I didn't ask him to. Back in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, palms pressed to my thighs. I heard his door close minutes later. Not a slam. A soft click. But it echoed anyway. I didn't sleep that night. My husband reached for me sometime around 3, pulling me closer in his sleep. His arm rested across my waist like muscle memory. I stayed still, eyes open, staring into the dark. What frightened me wasn't the line we hadn't yet crossed. It was how much I wanted to erase the space between us and stop pretending I didn't. The next afternoon, I brought a plate of food out to the guest house. My husband had gone golfing with a colleague, and the main house felt hollow, like a shell waiting for sound. The guest house was tucked near the edge of the yard, shaded by trees, a structure meant for privacy. Temporary living space, he had called it. Functional. Isolated. I told myself I was simply being thoughtful, that he probably hadn't eaten, that it would be rude not to check. But the truth pulsed under my ribs with every step across the lawn. He opened the door before I knocked. He must have seen me coming from the window. His shirt was rumpled, sleeves pushed to his elbows, and his hair was still damp, as though he'd just showered. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You didn't have to," he said, gesturing to the plate. "I know," I replied, "but you haven't come inside all day." He stepped aside to let me in. The space was small, barely a room and a half, but it felt like another world entirely. The air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. His books were scattered on the table, a pair of sneakers left near the door, a towel drying over the back of a chair. It was unkempt in a way that felt alive. He poured wine without asking, handing me a glass. I didn't refuse. "You're quiet today," he said. I shrugged. "Just tired." "From avoiding me?" I glanced at him, not prepared for the sharpness, but there was no sarcasm in his voice. Just observation, honest and uncomfortable. "I haven't been avoiding you," I said, though the words sounded thin. "You haven't been around." I sipped the wine. "That's not the same thing." He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You keep showing up and pulling away. What do you want from me?" The question pierced more than it should have. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out the small window behind him toward the garden, the afternoon light breaking in patches through the leaves. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe I just want to remember what it feels like to be wanted." He took a slow breath, eyes never leaving mine. "You think I don't want you?" I didn't reply. He stepped forward, closing the space between us with an ease that made it clear he'd decided the moment I stepped through the door. His fingers brushed mine as he took the glass from my hand, set it aside. There was no pause, no request. Just the quiet understanding of two people already standing on the edge. When he kissed me, it wasn't like the first time. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't testing a boundary. It was claiming something we both knew had already been surrendered. My hand moved instinctively to his chest, feeling the warmth beneath his shirt, the thud of his heartbeat that matched the rhythm of mine. And I didn't stop it. When we parted, I didn't speak. Neither did he. I stepped back, reached for the plate I had brought, now forgotten on the counter, and turned toward the door. But this time, I didn't close it behind me. I left it ajar, the light from outside spilling in, an unspoken invitation. A message that didn't need words. I crossed the lawn slowly, aware of my own breathing, aware of how my body still hummed. My skin remembered his touch, even where it hadn't happened. Inside the main house, I washed the wine glass with deliberate care, placed it back where it belonged. That night, I dressed for dinner in silence. My husband talked about a potential investment. I nodded at the right moments, passed him the pepper, listened without hearing. But later, as I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth, I looked at my reflection. Flushed cheeks, pulse visible in my throat, and I realized something terrifying. I wanted to go back. The next morning, my husband suggested dinner out. No occasion, no reason. Just the two of us. Like we used to, he said, smiling with a sincerity that made my stomach twist. I agreed. I smiled too. And for the rest of the day, I performed normalcy like a script I'd memorized long ago. I chose a navy dress I hadn't worn in years. Conservative but elegant, something he once told me made me look refined. I did my hair the way he liked, applied makeup carefully, evenly. I looked the part. We drove in comfortable silence, his hand resting on the gear shift, occasionally grazing my knee. I didn't flinch, but my mind remained elsewhere. He made a reservation at a place we used to frequent before life began spinning around appointments and construction plans. The waiter remembered us. That fact alone should have warmed me, but instead it made something inside me feel hollow. He ordered for me, just like he always had. The same wine, the same salad, the same steak, medium rare, because that's what I used to love. He talked about property values, about a friend's divorce, about someone's upcoming retirement party. I nodded in the right places, let him take my hand when he reached across the table. "I've missed this," he said. "Just being with you." I forced a smile and squeezed his hand gently. "Me too." But it wasn't true. I watched the flickering candle between us, its flame dancing in rhythm with the soft music overhead. Across the table, he was everything he had always been: stable, generous, respectful. But I no longer felt the current between us. Touching his skin was like brushing fabric. It registered, but it didn't move me. When we returned home, he kissed my cheek at the door, his lips warm but distant. Then he turned toward the bedroom, unbuttoning his shirt as he went. I followed a few minutes later, out of habit, out of duty, or maybe just out of inertia. In the dim light of the bedroom, he sat at the edge of the bed, undressing slowly. His eyes met mine in the mirror. "You look beautiful tonight," he said. "Thank you," I whispered. He reached for me, a touch on my wrist, then a kiss at my neck. Familiar, predictable. His fingers grazed the zipper at my back, and I let the dress fall to the floor. I didn't resist. I didn't speak. I moved as he guided me, my body compliant, practiced, but inside I was elsewhere. My eyes were open. My mind wandered, replaying the curve of someone else's jawline, the way his breath had brushed my skin, the kiss that still lingered in my mouth, the electricity of proximity that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with wanting. When it was over, I lay beside my husband in silence. He drifted off within minutes, his breathing evening out, one arm draped across my stomach as though I were part of the mattress. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster like constellations I could name. At some point, I slipped out of bed, padded to the bathroom, and stood under the warm stream of the shower. I scrubbed carefully, not in shame, not to erase anything, but to feel something. My skin tingled under the pressure. I tilted my head back, let the water fill my ears, and allowed the silence to drown out my thoughts. I dried off slowly, wrapped in a towel, and walked to the window. The guest house light was still on, a soft golden square in the darkness, like a signal, like a heartbeat. I stood there, watching it for a long time, unmoving. Not because I wanted to forget what had happened, but because I was afraid of how badly I wanted it to happen again. I returned from a morning run, hair damp with sweat, breath still shallow. The air was thick with the promise of late summer heat, and I moved through the house with the quiet rhythm of someone trying not to wake anyone, though I knew my husband had already left for the day. As I reached the staircase, I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. I froze, foot hovering above the first step. His voice followed, low, speaking to someone on the phone. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence. Confident, relaxed, present in a way that felt worlds away from the man I had just left sleeping next to me hours earlier. I moved quickly, cutting across the hall toward the laundry room. That's when I saw it. His shirt, folded on the back of the sofa, the one he'd worn yesterday when we passed each other in the hallway with nothing more than a glance. I hadn't noticed it missing, but I recognized it instantly. I picked it up without thinking. The fabric was still faintly warm, the scent of him woven into the cotton. Faint traces of soap, salt, something unmistakably male. I brought it closer to my face, not as a lover might, but like someone trying to understand what a feeling smelled like. I didn't hear the footsteps until they were almost behind me. "You forgot this," I said before turning. He was already looking at me, a brow raised. "You went looking for it?" "No," I lied. "I found it here." He stepped forward slowly. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but also the certainty beneath it. He was no longer unsure of me. That part was over. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm not." "You are." He reached out, touching the sleeve of the shirt still in my hand. Not my skin, just the fabric. But the sensation slid through me like a current. I swallowed, trying to hold on to some piece of sense of control, but it felt distant, like an echo of something that once mattered and now didn't. His fingers brushed against mine, deliberate, unapologetic. "You think I don't notice?" he asked. "The way you look at me when you think I'm not watching?" "Stop," I said too quickly. "Why?" "Because it's wrong." He paused, then evenly. "Is it worse than pretending you're happy?" My breath caught. There it was. The one thing I couldn't name but lived inside every quiet hour of my life. I turned away, moving toward the stairs, shirt still clenched in my hand. Behind me, he followed. At the top of the landing, I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no idea what to do next. My heart raced. Not with fear. With wanting, with memory. With anticipation so sharp it left no room for reason. He stepped beside me, close enough to touch. Close enough that if I shifted my weight even slightly, we'd be one motion away from something we couldn't take back. Then the door to my husband's office opened downstairs. I froze. My breath caught mid-chest. He was home. I hadn't heard the car. I hadn't heard the door. Panic rose in my throat as I turned toward the hallway. I stuffed the shirt under my arm and walked quickly into the bedroom, leaving the door half closed behind me. My hands were shaking now, for real this time. I heard his footsteps approaching the stairs, his voice calling up casually. "I'm back. Forgot the project folder." My voice came out too high-pitched. "Okay, it's probably in the office." "Found it." The footsteps paused just outside the bedroom door. I held my breath. "You look flushed," he said. "I went for a run." "You're glowing." He sounded pleased. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. He turned and left a moment later. Only after I heard the front door click shut did I exhale. My knees felt unsteady. I sat on the edge of the bed, shirt still pressed against my palms, the scent now mixed with the salt of my skin. I hadn't been caught. But the line between concealment and confession had never felt so thin. I spent the next morning in the sunroom, pretending to read. The book lay open on my lap, pages turning slowly as the wind shifted through the half-open windows. But the words swam, meaningless, drifting across my vision like fog. I wasn't thinking in complete sentences anymore. My mind was a collage of moments, half-conversations, touches not yet made but already remembered. The guest house was quiet. The front door shut, blinds drawn. He had left early, said nothing, left no note. It was the kind of absence that wasn't neutral. It was deliberate. A withdrawal I felt deep under my skin, like the echo of pressure after a tight grip has been released. I waited. Not visibly. I moved through the day with calm efficiency. I started laundry, reorganized a drawer, answered 2 emails. My husband had left again on business. An overnight trip this time. The kind of absence that used to feel uneventful now hung in the air like permission. In the afternoon, I went to the closet, reached for a silk blouse, then stopped. I pulled out an envelope from beneath a stack of scarves. It had no name on it, just a single page inside. I had written it the night before, after everything, before sleep, if you could call what I did sleeping. I unfolded it, read the words again. The truth, laid out like open wounds. The timeline, the feelings, The moments that couldn't be undone. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I wrote it simply, plainly, as if that could make it easier to read. I had planned to give it to him, my husband. But in the morning light, it felt wrong. Not because it was a lie, but because it was too soon to tell the truth. Or maybe because the truth no longer felt like something I wanted to hand over. It felt like something I wanted to carry. Alone. I ripped the page once, then again. Folded the pieces into smaller ones, placed them inside the bottom drawer of the vanity. I didn't throw them away. I couldn't. Not yet. Later, I found myself standing at the edge of the garden, staring at the guest house. The door was still shut, the curtains still drawn. I walked across the grass, not quickly, not slowly, just intentionally. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. The door opened a few inches. He stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I thought you were gone," I said. "I thought I should be." I stepped inside. The air was cooler than outside, darker. He didn't move to close the door, but he didn't move away either. "I wrote something," I said. I was going to give it to him. He nodded once. "Did you?" "No." "Why not?" I met his eyes, steady. "Because I don't know what I want more. Him to forgive me or you to stay." He looked at me for a long time, then turned away, ran a hand through his hair, sat down on the edge of the bed. "I have an interview next week," he said. "In another state. I'm probably leaving." The floor felt unsteady beneath me. "For how long?" I asked. "Indefinitely." I sat down beside him. Not too close, but not apart. "You could have told me," I said. "I didn't think it mattered." "It does." He looked at me then, a little sharper. "Enough to make you leave with me?" I didn't answer. He reached to the side table, handed me something. A book I'd loaned him weeks ago. I opened it slowly. Inside the back cover was a folded page. A map. Circled in red ink. A city I hadn't been to in years. "If you change your mind," he said, "you'll know where to find me." I left without touching him, without another word. I walked back through the garden, barefoot now, the cool earth grounding me. That night, I packed a small overnight bag. My husband would be home in the morning, but I wasn't running. Not yet. I just wanted to know what it felt like to choose silence without fear. The week passed in strange stillness. My husband returned from his trip with his usual blend of cheerful fatigue and quiet confidence, placing his suitcase neatly by the door and immediately asking what he'd missed. I answered as I always had, briefly, reassuringly. He didn't notice the absence in my tone, or if he did, he chose not to name it. We sat through breakfasts and dinners like scenes in a familiar play. He told stories about his meetings, described a new seafood place one of his colleagues had recommended, even suggested we plan a long weekend away together, somewhere quiet and warm. I nodded, smiled when expected, took sips of wine at the right time. My timing was perfect. My role, seamless. But inside, everything had fractured. Not in violent pieces, but in long, slow cracks, like glass under pressure. The weight of what I had not said, and of what I had felt, shifted constantly beneath my skin. I wasn't sure if I was mourning something or waiting for it to begin. I kept to small rituals to stay anchored. Cleaned out the linen closet, reorganized the spice rack, deleted old voicemails. Every task performed with precise control, as if order might offer relief. But even in those still moments, my thoughts drifted. At night, when he turned off the light and reached for me, I didn't resist. I let him hold me. I let him kiss me. I let him touch the surface of a body that had changed its allegiance. But inside, I was elsewhere. Not cruelly, just completely. Sometimes I would wake up before dawn and sit by the window in the hallway overlooking the backyard. The guest house lights never came back on. It sat quiet and hollow, the curtains always drawn, the air around it somehow different now. Untouched, abandoned. On the 6th day, I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. Then I searched the name of the city he'd marked in the book. The route was simple, a direct flight, 2.5 hours. The thought of it pressed against my chest like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I closed the lid without bookmarking anything. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry, I found the shirt again, the one I hadn't returned. It had slipped behind a stack of towels. I held it for a moment, then pressed it to my face, eyes closed. The fabric no longer held his scent. Time had done what it always does. Softened the edges, faded the traces. But something about it still felt electric in my hands, like memory encoded in thread. That evening, I told my husband I needed to get away for a few days. He didn't question it. He smiled, assumed I meant a spa, maybe a visit to a friend. He even offered to book something for me. I told him I'd prefer to plan it myself. Before bed, I packed a small suitcase and placed the marked book inside. No note, no explanations. Just one final glance around the bedroom we had shared for over a decade. The space felt too clean, too organized. Like a hotel I'd overstayed in. I didn't feel triumphant or tragic. I felt quiet, intentional. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. Hair pulled back, minimal makeup, an old t-shirt. But behind the eyes, there was something new. Or maybe something old, returned after being buried. Recognition. That night, I didn't dream. I woke before the sun, stepped out into the early morning air, the sky barely beginning to change. The street was silent. The suitcase wheels made no sound on the driveway. And as I closed the car door behind me, seatbelt clicking into place, I thought not about what I had left behind, but about what still might exist ahead, if I had the courage to walk toward it, or the strength to let it go.